The rust-colored dust of Naira 6 swirled around Tory Briggs' ankles as she planted the shovel into the ground. Her shadow stretched long across the barren landscape, a solitary figure against the vast emptiness of the abandoned colony. 16 days had passed since the evacuation order. 16 days since the last transport ship had lifted off, carrying away the remaining colonists, leaving behind only the skeletal remains of what was once humanity's hope for a new beginning. Tori wiped the sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of reddish dirt across her forehead. The air was hot and dry, sucking moisture from her skin with every breath. Around her, the failed terraforming equipment stood like monuments to human hubris: broken atmospheric processors, cracked carbon converters, and the massive water extraction system that had never managed to find anything but dust. Day 1, she muttered to herself, marking the spot where she would begin digging. The colony's sophisticated ground-penetrating radar had failed to detect water, but Tori had always trusted her instincts more than machines. As the colony's well engineer, she had spent years studying the subtle signs that might indicate subsurface water: slight variations in mineral composition, the way certain rocks weathered, the presence of specific formations that often accompanied ancient aquifers. The decision to stay behind had been entirely her own. When the Colonial Alliance had declared Naira 6 a failed project and ordered full evacuation, Tori had requested permission to remain and continue searching for water. Permission denied. Resources too limited. Return immediately. The bureaucratic response had been predictable. So she had hidden during the final evacuation, emerging only after the last ship disappeared into the rusty sky. All she had were the tools from the old station, manual drilling equipment, a few solar panels salvaged from the damaged arrays, basic filtration systems, and enough rations to last maybe 30 days if she was careful. Tori drove the shovel into the ground again. The red dust puffed around the blade. She had chosen this spot carefully, a slight depression in the landscape, where ancient water might have once flowed, creating a natural collection point beneath the surface. It was the type of formation that would have been overlooked by the colony's automated surveys, which had focused on larger potential reservoirs. "Water follows the path of least resistance," she said aloud, her voice swallowed by the empty expanse around her. "So do I." As the first day of digging progressed, the sun crawled across the sky, a pallid disk barely visible through the hazy atmosphere. Naira 6's failed terraforming had left the air thin and dusty, neither fully Earth-compatible nor returning to its original state. It was a planet caught in between, not quite dead, not quite alive. By nightfall, Tori had dug a hole about 3 feet deep, nothing but dust and more dust. She retreated to her makeshift shelter, a small dome fashioned from salvaged materials and solar sheeting. Inside, she carefully measured out her water ration for the day, allowing herself just enough to prevent dehydration. The irony wasn't lost on her, searching for water while rationing her own supply. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with the sound of rushing water and the sensation of cool liquid on her parched lips. Days 2 through 5 followed a similar pattern: dig, rest, drink sparingly, sleep poorly, repeat. The hole gradually deepened, and the composition of the soil began to change. The fine dust gave way to coarser material, volcanic ash mixed with small pebbles. Tori's hands developed blisters that broke and reformed as calluses. Her skin, despite the protective clothing, turned red and began to peel from exposure to Naira 6's radiation-heavy sunlight. On the 6th day, she hit a layer of clay. "Yes," she whispered, running the reddish material between her fingers. Clay often formed impermeable layers above aquifers, trapping water beneath. It was the first promising sign she'd found. The work became harder as she dug deeper. The clay gave way to volcanic rock that required more than just a shovel. Tori assembled the manual drill she'd brought from the colony's equipment shed. a heavy tool designed for geological sampling rather than well digging. Her progress slowed considerably. By day 8, the well was nearly 15 feet deep, requiring a rope ladder for access. Tori's body ached constantly. The skin on her hands had cracked in several places, and the wound on her left forearm, where she'd scraped it against a sharp rock, had developed an angry red infection that she treated with the limited medical supplies from her kit. On day 9, a dust storm swept across the plain. Tori was forced to take shelter, watching through the translucent walls of her dome as the world outside disappeared into a swirling red nightmare. The storm lasted nearly 24 hours, and when it finally subsided, she found her well partially filled with new sediment, a full day's work lost. "Damn it!" she shouted, kicking at the mound of fresh dust. Her voice echoed across the empty landscape, a sound so foreign that it startled her into silence. That was when she noticed them. On the ridge about half a kilometer away, 3 figures stood motionless. At first, Tori thought they might be rock formations she hadn't noticed before. The landscape of Naira 6 was constantly being reshaped by wind and dust. But then one of the figures moved, a slight shift that was unmistakably deliberate. Tori froze. The colony's biological surveys had found no large indigenous life forms, nothing but microscopic extremophiles living deep in the soil. Yet, there they stood, 3 distinctly non-human figures, silhouetted against the hazy sky. She raised a hand slowly, a universal gesture of greeting. The figures remained motionless. After several minutes of this silent standoff, Tori returned to her work, clearing the fresh sediment from her well. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the ridge. The figures remained, watching. That night, as she huddled in her shelter, Tori could see the faint outlines of the observers still on the ridge. They had not approached, but they had not left either. Sleep was impossible. She spent the night reviewing the colony's biological survey data on her tablet, searching for any mention of sentient life. There was nothing. Day 10 began with the 3 figures still watching from a distance. Tori decided to continue her work as if they weren't there. The well was now nearly 20 feet deep, and the volcanic rock had given way to a softer, sedimentary layer. Her tools were showing signs of wear. The drill bit had dulled considerably, and one of the shovel handles had developed a crack. As she worked, Tori found herself speaking aloud, a habit she'd developed during her days of isolation. "If there's water down there, I'll find it," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the deepening well. The colony gave up too soon. They always do. Find a planet, start terraforming, run into problems, abandon it, rinse and repeat. How many worlds have we left half transformed now? 5? 6? She paused to wipe sweat from her face. And what about the native life? Do we ever consider that? No. If it's not immediately obvious, we assume it doesn't exist. Microscopic extremophiles. That's all they found. But you're not microscopic, are you? She glanced toward the ridge where the 3 figures remained. What are you? And why are you watching me? No answer came, only the constant thin whine of the wind across the plain. On day 11, Tori's drill broke through into a small cavity. A rush of humid air emerged from the opening, carrying a scent that made her heart race, the unmistakable smell of moisture. Not water yet, but close. So close. She worked frantically now, widening the opening, careful not to collapse the surrounding material. As she cleared away the debris, she could feel the air growing increasingly damp. The rocks she removed were cool to the touch. And then it happened. As she pried away a final layer of sedimentary rock, water began to seep into the bottom of the well. Not a gush, not a flood, but a slow, steady accumulation of clear liquid. Tori sat back on her heels, watching in disbelief as the water level slowly rose. After all the sophisticated equipment had failed, after the colony had given up and departed, She had found water with nothing but determination and simple tools. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. When she opened them again, she noticed movement at the edge of the well. Looking up, she saw one of the three figures peering down at her. Up close, she could now make out details she hadn't seen from a distance. The being was roughly humanoid, but with significant differences. Its body was covered in what appeared to be overlapping plates of a chitinous material, colored in various shades of the same rusty red as the planet's soil. The head was elongated, with no visible nose or mouth, but with three dark indentations that might have been eyes. It had 4 upper limbs, 2 ending in what looked like hands with 3 digits each, and 2 that seemed more specialized. 1 carrying what appeared to be a tool or weapon of some kind. Tori remained perfectly still, her heart pounding. First contact, not with some grand diplomatic mission, but with a lone human digging a well on an abandoned planet. The being made no threatening moves. It simply observed her and the water now collecting at the bottom of the well. After several minutes, it retreated from view. That night, Tori didn't return to her shelter. She stayed by the well, watching as the water level continued to rise, now nearly 6 inches deep. She used a small testing kit from her supplies to analyze the liquid. The results were surprising. The water was clean, with mineral content similar to that of Earth's natural springs. It was drinkable. With trembling hands, Tori lowered a small cup into the well and brought up the first sample. She hesitated only briefly before taking a sip. The water was cool and slightly sweet, with a mineral taste that was not unpleasant. As she drank, she became aware that she was being watched again. All 3 beings now stood at the edge of the well, their bodies perfectly still, their eye-like indentations fixed on her. Slowly, Tori held out the cup, offering it to them. It was an instinctive gesture of sharing, of peace. One of the beings, the one that had looked down into the well earlier, stepped forward. It reached out with one of its upper limbs and took something from another of the beings. Then it approached Tori and held out what appeared to be a small object. Tori extended her hand, palm up. The being dropped the object into her palm. It was a piece of what looked like bone, carved with an intricate spiral pattern. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the spiral perfectly proportioned, drawing the eye inward toward its center. Tori studied it for a moment, then looked up at the being. "Thank you," she said softly. The being made no sound, but inclined its head slightly in what might have been acknowledgement. That night marked the beginning of a cautious exchange. Tori remained by the well, and the 3 beings stayed nearby, observing her and occasionally approaching to examine her tools or the water that continued to accumulate. By morning, the well contained nearly a foot of clear water. Tori began the process of installing a simple pump mechanism she had salvaged from the colony's equipment. As she worked, she became aware that the beings were watching her with what seemed like increased interest. One of them, a smaller individual that Tori had mentally named Sprig, due to its slightly greener tint, began mimicking her movements, picking up small rocks and arranging them in patterns similar to the components Tori was assembling. Another, the largest of the 3 with deep grooves in its chitinous plates that suggested great age, simply watched from a slight distance. Tori called this one Auric in her mind, imagining it as some kind of elder. The third, the one that had given her the spiral carving, moved with a vigilant alertness, frequently scanning the horizon as if watching for threats. This one, Tori named Ural, thinking of it as a sentinel. As Tori completed the pump installation, she decided to try communication again. She pointed to herself and said clearly, "Tori." The 3 beings remained silent, but Auric moved closer and extended one of its upper limbs, touching Tori's shoulder lightly. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. Tori repeated, "Tori," then pointed to the well and said, "Water." Sprig approached the well and peered down at the water. then made a soft clicking sound that seemed to emanate from somewhere beneath its chitinous plates. Ural remained vigilant, but moved slightly closer to the group, its attention divided between Tori and the surrounding landscape. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Tori continued to improve the well, adding reinforcements to prevent collapse and refining the pump mechanism. The beings came and went, sometimes all three together, sometimes just one or two. They never approached her shelter but seemed fascinated by her work at the well. On day 14, Tori decided to try an experiment. She had noticed that Sprig seemed particularly interested in her tablet. During her rest periods, she would sometimes play music through its speakers, old recordings that reminded her of Earth. Sprig would move closer whenever the music played, its body swaying slightly in what might have been appreciation. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plain, Tori set up her tablet near the well and started playing a collection of classical pieces: Bach, Mozart, Debussy. She sat nearby, watching as Sprig approached, followed cautiously by Auric and Ural. The three beings formed a semicircle around the tablet, their bodies perfectly still as the music filled the air. When the first piece ended, there was a moment of silence. Then, to Tori's astonishment, Sprig began to produce a series of sounds, clicks, whistles, and deep resonant tones that somehow mimicked the rhythm and cadence of the music that had just played. Auric joined in, adding lower frequencies that vibrated the air. Even Ural contributed, producing sharp, precise sounds that punctuated the improvised composition. Tori listened, transfixed. It was both alien and beautiful, a response to human music that incorporated elements she recognized, but arranged them in ways she could never have imagined. When they finished, Tori applauded spontaneously. The beings seemed startled by the sound, but not alarmed. Sprig even mimicked the gesture, bringing its upper limbs together in a clapping motion. That night, for the first time, Tori felt not alone but part of something new, a fragile connection forming across species, across worlds. The next morning, Tori found a small collection of objects arranged near the well, pieces of the local minerals and rocks, each with unique patterns or colors. It was clearly a gift, a continuation of the exchange that had begun with the spiral carving. Tori responded by leaving her own collection, small tools she had fashioned but no longer needed, a piece of reflective material from her shelter, and a small, solar-powered light that glowed softly in the darkness. The gifts were gone when she returned from gathering more materials for the well's reinforcement, replaced by new objects, what appeared to be seeds or spores of some kind, carefully wrapped in a fibrous material she hadn't seen before. Tori recognized the significance immediately. Seeds represented future, growth, continuation. She collected them carefully and set aside a small area near the well where she could attempt to plant them. As she worked on preparing the soil, mixing it with the mineral-rich water from the well, Auric approached and knelt beside her. Using gestures and occasional touches, the being seemed to be instructing her on the proper depth and spacing for the seeds. Tori followed the guidance, planting each seed with care. When she finished, Auric produced a small container of what looked like fine powder and sprinkled it over the planted area. Then the being gestured toward the well, indicating that water should be added. Together, they watered the newly planted seeds. It was a simple act but profound in its implications. Two species from different worlds collaborating to create new life on a planet that had been declared dead. The days that followed brought more exchanges. Tori showed the beings how her tools worked, demonstrating the principles of leverage and simple machines. They, in turn, showed her how to identify certain minerals by their appearance and texture, knowledge that proved valuable as she continued to reinforce and expand the well. Communication remained largely nonverbal, based on gestures, demonstrations, and the exchange of objects. Yet Tori felt she was beginning to understand her new companions, to recognize patterns in their behavior and meaning in their movements. Auric was indeed an elder, respected by the others and possessing knowledge they deferred to. Ural was a protector, constantly vigilant, skilled in reading the landscape for signs of danger. Sprig was young, curious, eager to learn and mimic. They were a small group, perhaps scouts or explorers from a larger community, somewhere beyond the ridge. Or perhaps they were, like Tori, individuals who had chosen to remain in this place when others had left. On day 20, the seeds they had planted together began to sprout, thin, reddish stems pushing up through the soil. Sprig discovered them first, producing excited clicking sounds that brought the others running. Tori watched as the three beings gathered around the sprouting plants, their bodies communicating what she now recognized as joy. It was the first time she had seen them express such an unguarded emotion. That same day, as the new plants were celebrating life, Tori noticed something troubling: tracks in the dust, not far from her shelter. They weren't made by her new companions. The pattern was different, the impressions deeper and more widely spaced. Something else was moving across the plain of Nera 6. When Ural returned from one of its regular patrols, Tori showed it the tracks. The being examined them closely, then made a series of sharp, staccato clicks that brought Auric and Sprig hurrying over. The three beings conferred in their clicking language, their bodies tense. Then Ural disappeared over the ridge, moving with a speed Tori hadn't seen before. Auric approached Tori and made a series of gestures that she interpreted as instructions to stay near the well. Then it too departed, following Ural, but in a slightly different direction. Only Sprig remained, positioning itself between Tori and the direction from which the tracks had come. Its usual playful demeanor was gone, replaced by the same vigilant alertness that characterized Ural. Night fell, and neither Auric nor Ural returned. Tori and Sprig remained by the well, watching the darkness. Tori had dimmed her lights, instinctively understanding the need for caution. In the pre-dawn hours, a sound broke the silence, a low, mechanical hum that Tori recognized immediately. It was the sound of a Colonial Alliance shuttle, its engines powering down as it prepared to land. Tori felt a surge of conflicting emotions. On one hand, the arrival of other humans meant supplies, communication with the wider universe, perhaps even eventual transport back to inhabited space. On the other hand, it meant potential conflict with her new companions, bureaucratic interference with her work, possibly even forced evacuation. As the shuttle's landing lights appeared on the horizon, Sprig became agitated, producing a series of urgent clicks. Moments later, Auric and Ural returned, accompanied by several more beings of their kind, all moving with purposeful haste. They gathered around the well, forming a protective circle. One of the newcomers carried what appeared to be a large crystal or gemstone that glowed with an inner light. It placed this at the edge of the well, where the glow illuminated the water below. Auric approached Tori and gently but firmly moved her into the center of their circle, positioning her directly beside the well. Then it pressed something into her hand, another carved spiral, this one larger and more complex than the first. The message seemed clear. They were claiming her as one of their own, declaring the well and its creator under their protection. The shuttle landed about a kilometer away, its lights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. After a few minutes, figures emerged, humans in the distinctive environmental suits of the Colonial Alliance Reassessment Division. Tori knew the protocol. The Reassessment Division was sent to abandoned colonies to evaluate whether conditions had changed enough to warrant a second attempt at settlement. They would conduct surveys, gather samples, and file reports that would eventually make their way through the bureaucratic maze of the Alliance. 5 figures approached the well, their suit lights sweeping across the landscape. When the beams illuminated Tori and her companions, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, One of the figures rushed forward, only to be stopped by another who grabbed its arm. "Tori Brigg?" a voice called through an external speaker. "Is that you?" Tori recognized the voice. Dr. Eliza Marston, the chief terraforming specialist who had declared Nyra 6 unsuitable for colonization. "It's me," Tori called back, not moving from her position within the protective circle. "Are you being held against your will?" Dr. Marston asked, her voice tense. "Are you in danger?" Tori almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm exactly where I choose to be." The 5 humans conferred briefly. Then Dr. Marston stepped forward again, stopping when Ural and 2 of the newcomers shifted their positions slightly. "We detected water," Marston said. "Our orbital scan showed a new aquifer breach. We came to investigate." She paused, then added, "We thought you'd left with the evacuation." "I stayed," Tori said simply. "I found water and friends." There was another pause, longer this time. "Those beings," Marston said finally. "They weren't in our biological survey." "Maybe you weren't looking in the right places," Tori replied. "Or maybe they didn't want to be found until they were ready." One of the other humans stepped forward, a tall figure Tori didn't recognize. "We need to establish a perimeter and set up a base camp," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. "Alliance protocol for first contact requires—" "This isn't first contact," Tori interrupted. "That happened days ago, and it's going quite well without protocols or perimeters." The man seemed taken aback. "Nevertheless, we need to—" Oryx stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Tori. In one of its upper limbs, it held the glowing crystal, which now pulsed with an inner light that matched the rhythm of the water pump Tori had installed. The message was unmistakable. This place, this well, was claimed and protected. The Alliance team retreated a short distance to confer. Tori could see animated gestures and hear raised voices, though the words were indistinct. Finally, Dr. Marston returned alone, her hands held open in a gesture of peace. "We need to understand what's happening here," she said, her voice softer now. "You've made contact with a previously unknown sentient species. You've found water where our surveys said there was none. This changes everything about Nyra 6's assessment." Tori nodded. "It does. But understand this. These beings protected me when they could have seen me as an invader. They shared knowledge and helped me survive. They're not subjects for your reports or specimens for your labs. They're people. And this is their home." Marston was silent for a moment, then said, "Alliance protocol does allow for indigenous rights recognition in cases of established sentient populations. But we need documentation, evidence of cultural development, proof of territorial claims." Tori held up the spiral carving Oryx had given her. "This is their art," she said. "The well is our collaboration. The plants we're growing together are our future." She gestured toward the ridge. "And whatever is over that rise is their home, which they've chosen not to show me yet. That's their right." The negotiation that followed lasted well into the day. The Alliance team set up a small outpost far enough from the well to honor the territorial boundary the beings had established. Tori served as an intermediary, though her understanding of her companions was still largely intuitive, rather than linguistic. What emerged was an uneasy truce. The Alliance would recognize the indigenous rights of the beings, whom they insisted on classifying as Nyran natives in their reports, to the territory surrounding the well. In return, they would be allowed to establish a small research station to study the planet's changing hydrology. Tori knew it was just the beginning of what would likely be a complex and occasionally contentious relationship. The Alliance, for all its talk of indigenous rights, was still primarily interested in resource extraction and colonization. The beings, whom Tori continued to call by the names she had given them in her own mind, were cautious about human expansion into their territory. But the well remained a neutral ground, a place where both species could meet and continue the careful dance of learning to understand each other. In the weeks that followed, more of the native beings emerged from their hidden community beyond the ridge. They brought with them new seeds, new tools, new carved objects that they exchanged for human artifacts. The small garden beside the well expanded, now containing both earth plants from the Alliance supplies and native species that had been dormant during the planet's long dry period. Tori remained at the center of this emerging community. She had been offered a position with the Alliance research team but had declined. Instead, she continued to work on improving the well and expanding the garden, serving as a bridge between humans and natives. One evening, as Naira Six's sun set behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the now thriving garden, Auric approached Tori with a new carving. This one was different, not a spiral, but a circle containing what appeared to be a map or diagram. Tori studied it carefully, then looked up at Auric in surprise. "There are more wells," she said, understanding dawning. "This shows where they are." Auric made a gesture of affirmation, then pointed to specific marks on the carving, locations of other water sources that the native beings had known about, but had kept hidden from the human colonists. Tori understood the significance of this sharing. It was a gesture of trust, a step toward a more equal partnership. The next day, she showed the carving to Dr. Marston, who studied it with growing excitement. "If these locations are accurate," Marston said, "then Naira 6 has a much more extensive subsurface water system than we ever suspected. This could change everything about the planet's habitability assessment." "It changes things," Tori agreed. "But remember, these aren't just resources to be claimed. They're places the natives have known about and protected for who knows how long. Any development has to be done with their consent and cooperation." Marston nodded slowly. "I understand, but the Alliance Council will want—" "The Alliance Council isn't here," Tori interrupted. "We are. And we have a chance to do things differently this time. Not just claim and exploit, but share and grow together." As if to emphasize her point, Sprig appeared at the edge of the garden, carrying a basket woven from local fibers. Inside were the first fruits from the native plants they had sown together, small, red berries that had proven safe for human consumption. Sprig offered the basket to Marston, who hesitated only briefly before accepting it with a small bow of thanks. It was a small gesture, insignificant perhaps in the grand scheme of interplanetary politics. But as Tori watched the exchange, she felt a spark of hope. The well she had dug in defiance of protocols and predictions had become more than just a source of water. It was the beginning of a new kind of community, one built on mutual respect and shared survival rather than conquest and exploitation. As the sun set over Naira 6, casting its rusty light across the garden and the well at its center, Tori thought about the spiral carving that had been the first gift from her native friends. Life was like that spiral, circling back on itself, yet always moving forward, connecting past and future in a continuous flow, like water rising from deep beneath the surface, finding its way into the light. In the distance, beyond the ridge, she could see the glow of the native settlement that was gradually revealing itself to human eyes. Closer, the lights of the Alliance research station created a counterpoint, and in between, the well and garden stood as a bridge between two worlds, not the grand, transformative terraforming project the Alliance had envisioned, but something perhaps more valuable, a small, sustainable beginning built on cooperation rather than conquest. Tori placed her hand on the edge of the well, feeling the cool dampness of the stone. Beside her, Auric did the same, its chitinous fingers almost touching hers. No words were needed. The water flowing beneath their hands spoke a language both could understand, the universal tongue of life continuing, adapting, finding a way forward together.